Commerce is being reshaped from every direction. AI, logistics, shifting consumer expectations, and global supply chain pressures. What does it all add up to? Our final panel is going to take a crack at that question. Please welcome to the stage our moderator, Alicia Esposito, Director at Future Commerce, and Jacob Bourdreau, CTO and co-founder of Stored. This session is presented by Stored.
All right, they set expectations very high for this conversation.
I know, we'll take a crack at it. But.
Yeah, absolutely. And we already decided we are going to open it up for questions at the end, hopefully, since it's just the two of us here. So take some notes, keep some memos in your heads as we are talking about things that are happening in this world of commerce. And anything that you want to probe a little bit, ask follow-up questions, we welcome it. But I feel like the title of this session is a bit kismet because every day my job is to explore the future of commerce. And at our organization, we believe that commerce is innately a cultural experience. It's about identity exchange because what we buy, the brands we engage with, how we shop, the devices we use, it's all connected to our beliefs, our ideas of how we want to be perceived in the world, our understanding of the world. So the last session, all of the geopolitical factors and everything that's happening on a macro scale does trickle down to the consumer. So with all of that in mind, Jacob, let's kind of ground our conversation, I guess. So when you hear basically what I just said, this idea that commerce is innately culture, how does that translate to what you're thinking about every day and also what you're hearing from the merchants and the brands that are trying to adapt to what is happening at the consumer level and at the cultural level as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's touched on through a number of talks today, but we're obviously in a very unique time. But in particular, I think in commerce, because you're seeing such a shift in consumer expectations. And I think you touched on it well with how commerce is such a personal endeavor. I think, I'll be the first to say I don't like spending hours inside a mall, but at the same time, shopping is a personal endeavor in that we all like to shop. We have we obviously live in a capitalistic society. We have a culture that focuses a lot on this productivity and this commerce element, and so there's this infusion between commerce and culture that makes it hyper personal. And I think what's in particular really unique for brands today is you see this consumer shift that's happening before our eyes where historically the consumer expectations shifted with technological changes. So, if we think about the shift of the internet, it took a series of years. It took 10 years to go from 14% of US adoption to over 2/3. For mobile phones, that shrunk. It took, about 6 years to reach similar scale. And for AI, we saw with ChatGPT launch, in 2 months, it was at 100 million monthly active users. And if their statistics are to be believed, they're now at 900 million or 1 billion weekly active users. Now, maybe some of those are bots, maybe some of those are real people, but at the end of the day, consumers are leaning in and they're adapting to this technology, and it's changing their perception and their buying behavior. So when we think about some of those trends, the everything availability is one example of consumer expectations that have shifted. We just go online and we expect to be able to buy anything. You can buy cars online, you can buy homes online, you can buy just about anything you can think of. You just assume that you have this ability to purchase it. When we think about the shift of speed, Amazon was one of the biggest drivers, but often people miss that the gig economy really drove and shifted consumer expectations for speed. If I can get my groceries delivered or I can get my meal delivered in an hour or less, why can't I get my packages delivered in an hour or less? And those ramifications are still playing out. And I think the same goes with AI and this personalization aspect where consumers, we could talk through some of the stats of how consumers have quickly adopted this technology and where they both love it and are nervous about it. But But ultimately, what it's doing is they're using it as a tool to better understand their preferences and better understand the landscape of products. So, partially as a discovery tool, but partially as an intent shaping tool. And so when they arrive at a brand with higher intent, it puts greater and greater expectations for that brand to deliver. And so I think for merchants and brands, the challenge they face today is how is that marketing landscape changing? So how do they ultimately reach their end consumers? But two, how do they service this bifurcating and really shifting landscape where consumers show up not just with an interest in the brand, but with an incredibly high intent and these expectations that one can result in rewards for the brand. In many cases, consumers arriving from AI, they shop longer, they are on page longer, they convert higher. But only if those expectations are met. Only if, when I search for the, best sunscreen for the summer, that I arrive and I see the qualities that I implicitly assumed or I received from my AI companion that I chatted with in that discovery session. So long-winded, but I think it comes back to this challenge that I don't think anyone's quite figured out yet, which is how do I service these consumers that are now not just a persona or a segment block, but really individual and unique in their requirements and in their intent when they arrive at my website or arrive at my storefront.
Yeah, and I think that really sets the stage for a lot of the layers we're going to be peeling back as we think about the consumer as they are today, because it is so nuanced. In our research, we've actually uncovered the fact that, a common term in the retail industry is omnichannel or unified commerce. And it's this idea that a consumer will go to a variety of different channels, and sometimes it varies depending on, the need. And in our research, we have found it's even more granular and even more nuanced than that, and that has led us to use the term omnimodal instead, and that connects to this idea that we have different modes. We have different modes of feeling, different modes of need, different modes of understanding, like I know what I'm looking for, or I know I have a need and I need to address that need. So I think that really sets the onus is on the brands and the retailers, right? Because they need to be delivering upon all of those different modes and all of those different contexts. And you're absolutely right. AI kind of provides the framework or the setup to allow merchants to do that. And I want to go back to your point around that rate of adoption, because it is staggering. I think it's 50% household adoption in the US in about 3 years for AI. And like you mentioned, mobile internet took about like twice as long. So let's break that down through the lens of like the merchants and the brands, because they need to provide and create the infrastructure to address that. So what does that pace of adoption and that rate of change mean? Like, are they struggling to keep up? Like, where are they prioritizing from an infrastructure standpoint right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's an important question for brands, and I don't know that there's any hard and fast right answer, because depending on the category, there can be wildly different effects of consumer behavior and how they're arriving at these brands. But I think one of the things, and I know we'll probably get to it and talk about some of the commoditization that's happening, but I think one of the things that's important here is with this rate of adoption, we between some of your studies and Stored's consumer studies, we saw something like 38% of consumers in 2024. So they used AI in their shopping, in particular their holiday shopping. That went up to 51%. I was seeing some recent studies from Capital One that suggested from their reviews that it would be 80% of consumers using AI for their shopping this year. And I think, no matter how you look at that, probably somewhere in the 50 to 80+% range that are using AI in their day-to-day shopping. I mean, we could probably do a show of hands. I know I've used it for my shopping, for my discovery, for all sorts of use cases. Maybe perhaps as a technologist, I'm a little more friendly to the AI when they take over, but I think the rate of growth is pretty high, and so for brands, it shifts a couple things. So one, there's the marketing aspect. So we've seen just an absolute surge in AEO. which is this landscape for brands that they need to operate in now, moving from a world where they're playing the search rankings to they're trying to shift an understanding of the factual and highly objective elements of their products and build trust. And I think this is a really interesting shift because when we talk about that personalization, we talk about the use cases of AI from a shopping standpoint, from a consumer standpoint, why would I use it for discovery? Well, because there are so many products, there are so many promises, there are so many messages that I need a way to sift through it all. And implicit in that is an expectation that I'm getting to an objective breakdown of the best qualities. And I think if we probe that a little bit deeper, it's interesting for brands because historically you could lean into a brand-heavy, a marketing-heavy aspect to go win consumers and build loyalty. And I think in a lot of cases that's getting stripped away because you have consumers just land at your site based off a recommendation from an LLM that's pulling from publicly available information. Hopefully you have your product details and descriptions and all of the inputs that someone is querying against that before they would do silently on your site, and now they're doing before they ever arrive at your site. And so the piece there is that it's a shift really, I think, from the brand building up front to the brand building in the transaction and afterwards. And what that implies is there's a shift of responsibility and a shift of importance to the entire delivery experience. You know, if before you could win on brand alone, if before you could win on product alone, now you need to win on your product, but you also need to win on the delivery experience. I mean, we see this firsthand at Sword. Obviously, we're deeply aware. We ship tens of millions of packages and over 10 billion of GMV every single year. And what we've seen is that both in surveying consumers, both in third-party data, 40% of consumers will make a purchase based off the estimated delivery date or lack thereof. You know, am I going to get this product when I want it, when I expect it? And I'm sure everyone's experienced that at some point online where they go to a store, they really excited about the product, you get all the way to the checkout, and you realize it'll arrive too late, so you go search elsewhere. Well, now you're introducing additional competition, additional costs to the brand. So the checkout and the transaction experience is really important to the brand building, but likewise is the post-purchase and the delivery experience, because 8 out of 10 consumers, if they have a poor delivery experience, they won't shop from the brand again. So, I bounced around a little bit there, but I think it lays the landscape where if now some portion of my consumers, and increasing every year, are arriving at my site from an LLM where they've had discussions, they have all the first-party data and personalization happening with these frontier labs, and they're arriving with some intent that I need to deliver on. That makes it really critical that I can communicate that clearly for my product, but then it makes it really critical that I can retain them and I can build that loyalty in the experience they have from there on after. And so what we're seeing with brands is they're placing a lot more emphasis on their physical infrastructure and the ability to facilitate fast and easy shipping to both capture those transactions, but then create a branded experience and really play into all those latent opportunities in the entire post-purchase experience, because that's where they'll retain the customers and that's where they'll turn the value of these LLM tools into a new growth engine for them if they can ultimately keep that conversion and keep those customers coming back.
Yeah, we like to say that in this age of AI, quote unquote, brand has never been less important, but also never been more important.
Yep.
And it's about uncovering what that means for your distinct business.
Exactly.
So we'll get into that, because I think the heart of it is that consumers are turning to AI as, I'm glad you used the term objectivity, because in our research, they have used phrases like personal companion when referring to their AI agent, or personal shopper that I can refer to anytime and anywhere I need it. So there's that objectivity, like, okay, this bot, this being, digital being, is going to serve me the best thing for my needs. There's no, motive behind it, right? So brands need to show up in those.
Until ads show up in your chat.
Well, that's a whole other conversation. We don't have time for that. But because the question is, well, what happens when monetization comes into the equation? Will that relationship that we form with our LLMs be damaged or looked at differently, because we've seen that happen in influencer marketing. We've seen that happen in social media marketing. What was once a soapbox, so to speak, for people to share their experiences and connect with people who are like them is now monetized. And even though people still turn to it, that feeling of trust and like authentic connection is very much fractured. So with that, I mean, it's interesting that you kind of broke down all of the layers and all of the ways that AI is hitting different stages of the value chain, from discovery all the way through to delivery, post-purchase. And 88% of organizations say they're using AI, but only 7% are fully scaled. So there's clearly, people are at different stages, and of course that's to be expected. But are there any notable gaps in this stage? And what does closing the gap require? Like, is it cultural? Is it purely technology-based? Is it a combination of the two? What are you seeing?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is a fundamental question for every organization today. I'll maybe speak specifically to the commerce angle and to brands and merchants. If you think about where you can apply, whether it be the latest and greatest LLM models to your business, or if we zoom back 10 years ago, we used to call ML AI, and now only LLMs are AI. So we can take the broad landscape, but if you think about the use cases, there's a number of requirements, and the first and foremost is data and data quality. Even if you think about your interactions with an LLM, the context is what guides all of the answers. It's not. I hate to break it to the doomsayers, but it's not an intelligent being, at least not yet. It is relying upon the context that it is given, and it's either trained on or you're providing in the prompt. And one of the challenges for companies of all shapes and sizes is, one, do they have data accessible? Two, is it actually of good quality? And it's incredible to watch. We talk about that 88% number. I think that was I think it was a McKinsey report or something to that effect, and I think they also had in there something like 92% of organizations say that they are will invest more in AI. And ultimately, the challenge that brands and companies face is you can, slap a chatbot over top. You can, take a number of these steps, but until you fundamentally have the right data architecture underneath, you won't get the compounding effect. So first and foremost, do you have the data? Is it in a quality format that you can do something with it? You can learn from it. You can train on it. You can build workflows around it. Two is unified workflows. So, if we zoom out, we say, great, I've got all of this marketing data. I've got all of this operations data. I've got all this financial data. Does it live together? If you do something with it, can you apply it across all of your systems? I mean, this is, I think, a huge challenge for brands in particular, because, if you just look at the Shopify ecosystem, there's an incredible number of apps. And the App Store is both scaling dramatically and in some ways, dying from a plethora, dying from too many apps, because the growth over each quarter and now moving towards months, the same number of apps that are launched in the Shopify App Store is equivalent to what was launched in a year. So the number of use cases for brands are getting solved, but they're getting solved through a series of products and through a series of applications, some of which talk to each other, most of which don't. Most of which have their own first-party data that they're using in their workflows. So if you think for a brand, how can I best leverage AI to address some of these points that we've raised thus far of these high-intent consumers, this shifting landscape of personalization? Well, I need to be able to do it across my entire system, and that means I need to orchestrate across all of these apps. So you've got this really challenging piece of a unified workflow. And then I think third would ultimately be cultural and people. This is something that we take near and dear to heart at Sword. We actually, and I encourage everybody to do this, we actually have in our career ladder an AI capabilities element. Because if everyone in this room believes that AI is not going away, that it's here to stay, well then you should expect that all of your team members are capable in it, all the way up through your leadership. And I think this is a huge challenge for companies where, they'll try to just drop AI over top, and they don't have the capabilities or the conviction from a leadership standpoint, so they're not able to actually infuse it and apply it in ways that might break the way that they've been doing things historically. They might have to remove processes. They might have to change teams. They might have to change products and workflows. But ultimately, if they embrace it, that's where they'll get the compounding effects. And we think a lot about this at Stored because, it's kind of I'm obviously pretty biased as a co-founder CTO at Stored, but I think it's very validating to our thesis, which when we set out to build Stored a little over a decade ago now, we operated with this thesis that you cannot build the physical infrastructure distinct from the software and the digital infrastructure. And our rationale for that, while we've maybe gotten better at conveying it over the years, really came down to the fact that we believed there's a fundamental gap if you try to retrofit existing solutions into a physical world with all the permutations, the human elements, and the complexities behind it, versus building it hand in hand where you have this feedback loop. And I actually think the same is true here with AI, and part of the reason why we're seeing such an ability to infuse it and apply it across all of Stored's products is that you fundamentally need the first-party data, which comes back to that data quality, and you need that feedback loop, which only happens if you have the ability to apply it across your workflows, if you have the ability to have the conviction across your leadership and your team, because it's the feedback loop that allows it to get better and to ultimately create the compounding effects beyond just, okay, cool, it can do this, SOP the same time over and over. Well, is the SOP good? Is it, actually what it needs to be for the year ahead or for the changes in the market? And you only get that if you have that feedback loop versus just dropping in, whether a Frontier Labs model or dropping in an existing tool.
I'm really glad you brought up the point about, the data may be clean, the data may be good, you may get your house in order, but does everyone have access to that data and the tools to use it effectively? Because I've been covering the retail industry for about 15 years now, and we've been talking about silos since before then, probably long before then, and it seems like those underlying cultural issues are still very much present, and we're even more connected at an organizational level, like supply chain, delivery updates. That has a trickle-down effect into how you're communicating with the customer, how you're marketing to the customer, what products are you surfacing in your recommendations. So as that's getting more and more connected, the consumers are aware of how connected it is. So if you're not creating that synergy, for lack of a better term, across the organization, then having the tech and the apps is kind of a moot point unless there's accuracy and there's an ability to fulfill on all the insight, right?
For sure. Yeah, I mean, a good example is, you could have the best product in the world and have incredible product descriptions. You built some great AEO, and so you're showing up in all these LLM queries. And so you suddenly have built this high intent audience that is showing up and ready to, transact with your business. If you can't show them that you have inventory available, or worse yet, you say that you have it, and then it's actually on back order, and now you're creating this discordance between the high intent they arrived with and the experience that you're actually able to deliver. I mean, there's almost no point. You're going to churn these customers, and it comes back to that prior point of the 8 out of 10 consumers will say that if they have a poor delivery experience, they won't shop with the brand again. So, now you have maybe this highest value audience, this high intent consumer that's ready to transact that you're just burning through because it comes back to this same point of, you don't have your systems in order, they're not talking to each other, and you haven't built this infrastructure that supports the scale and the flexibility that you need to have going forward.
I have to say, even though we've been talking about and interacting with social media and social media advertising for so many years, about a decade, I'm still getting social media ads, and when I click on it, the product is out of stock, and I'm like, how are we still here? And it connects to the LLM of it all on the consumer side, because if they're getting a recommendation from their trusted bot, right, and it's the perfect product and it's just what they needed, and they're ready to click through, right, the high intent consumer, consumer. And in our research, we learned that 77% of consumers, despite getting that in-app LLM recommendation, they still want to go to the brand website to get more information, to do more research and make that purchase. But if they click over and it's out of stock, or it doesn't have the delivery terms that they need, say they're leaving for a vacation in 2 days and you're offering 5 days, then that intent is gone. Obviously, they're going to go to your competitor, or they're going to go elsewhere to get what they need, or they may not buy anything at all because they're so frustrated. So again, it just shows how interconnected everything is.
Yeah, and I think to that point, it also, and maybe we'll touch on this a little bit, but it also speaks to one, systems have to be more interconnected than ever. So you really need vertically integrated systems. You need to have, like, we think a lot about this at Stored because we've spent many years and capital building everything from our own warehouse management system, transportation management system, order management system, parcel billing and auditing, and all the way through to the front end commerce side of it. And part of the rationale there was you have to have these systems talking in real time to ensure that you're actually able to action upon these latent opportunities. I mean, in commerce, it's gotten so competitive. It's, whether referencing back to, I think Scott in the conversation on geopolitics was talking about this challenge between differentiation and commoditization, and how there's an aspect of trust and availability that plays into that. And the same is true across commerce, because, there was the heyday maybe, let's see, 10, 15 years ago for drop shipping. And then, the drop shippers all brought the same product to market. It was commoditized. You had to win on product. You have, the marketing landscape, between the iOS updates a little while back now through meta costs going up, it's incredibly saturated. It's incredibly costly across all of the channels. And even from a product standpoint, whether you have state-backed adversaries or not, you've got so many competitors that are able to flood the market with similar products, and the time between a novel capability and competitors is so short. And so, when you think about this landscape of increased competition, it really pushes, particularly with this backdrop of AI, towards brands needing to meet consumers exactly where they are, which it really speaks to the personalization level. And you can only personalize to a consumer if you, one, going back to the same points, have all the data, and two, your systems talk to each other, right? So if I know that my inventory is available, or that my inventory is slow moving, and I know that this consumer has high intent, I might want to put together a specific offering that ties those 2 points together. Now, the average brand, the average company cannot do that, because they don't have those systems talking together. They don't have their storefront, and they don't have their WMS, and they don't have their marketing channels working together. But the same applies across the delivery experience. One of our products that I'll just tout till the ends of the earth is this product called Stored on Box. And what it is it's a personalized insert that goes inside the box. So, if you think about all the marketing channels, heavily saturated, you're paying insane acquisition costs. In this case, you're reaching out to your consumers, and we're expanding it to other audiences, but you're reaching out to your customers with 100% open rate because we all open the boxes that arrive at our doors, but you're personalizing it to them. And the only reason I bring it up is because I think it's a small example of all the steps that a brand needs to take to win in this hyper-competitive space, as we see the shift, where how many brands are saying, hey, Jacob, thanks for your 5th order inside their package? How many brands are doing that on their post-purchase page? How many brands are doing that in their messages that consumer expectations are increasing behind, that I should know exactly when the package is out for delivery? I should know when it arrives at my door. And if you think about it, there's all of these latent opportunities throughout that delivery experience that brands can capitalize on that will improve their retention and improve their growth. But it fundamentally comes down to, can they connect those systems together to achieve those outcomes?
So that's where the opportunity for brand differentiation lies, because in my opinion, it doesn't matter what category of product you're selling, there are different ways to kind of pull out in those different stages of the post-purchase moment, so to speak, to really build that trust and honestly probably bring it to the next level and make it more centered on your brand versus, say, the LLM where they got the recommendation to begin with, right?
Yep. Well, and I think that's an interesting challenge for brands today, especially is how can they collect and have more first-party data to act upon? I think one of the trends that will be interesting to watch is if consumers are engaging more, and we see this increase where they use LLMs for discovery and shopping, all of that context on that consumer, their likes, their dislikes, their preferences, maybe certain ingredients or products that they want to avoid, that's all getting stored with the LLMs and the frontier labs. The brand is just getting the transaction to understand that consumer. And so I think implicit in that is it kind of comes back to the same point, which is, well, now that transaction and that post-purchase experience becomes so critical. How can you maximize that to both personalize it to the consumer, but also understand more about them, right? How can you capture more interaction points and drive them back to your brand versus drive them back to, say, the LLM or the source that they came from, where you're ultimately not getting any additional information on them to build, better personalization or better conversion of them in the future.
Yeah. And I think over the course of our conversation, we've been talking about AI-driven commerce, or I guess the first two levers of agentic commerce, which is facilitating the browsing and also facilitating the research and comparison stages, so top and middle funnel of the buying journey. But we haven't talked about the bottom funnel yet, which is the actual purchase of the product. And your State of AI and E-commerce report states that 30% of consumers say they'll never let AI access their payment information, which kind of eliminates that whole, the bots are going to buy for us, and we're going to be completely out of the equation. There are a lot of other cultural reasons why I would agree with that, but let's break down that trust gap a little bit. Like, what does it mean for brands that are building their infrastructure right now? How do they future-proof it if and possibly when that changes or starts to shift?
Yeah. I mean, I think it comes back to a lot of the points we've been hitting on, which is it places a greater emphasis on the physical infrastructure and the product development for a brand. So, how much are they investing in product development aside from marketing, or their fulfillment and delivery experience and their post-purchase experience aside from the front-end marketing? Because I think so many companies and brands are demand generation focused. It's one of the easiest places you can see numbers go up. So you focus on the metrics, and that's where you spend your time. But if you think about this landscape where, perhaps the top and middle of funnel starts to shift, perhaps the value of a larger online storefront or a kind of standard static online storefront shifts, and perhaps it needs to be entirely customized, personalized landing pages based off a consumer that arrives from an LLM. Perhaps the LLM starts to make those purchases for them. Well, if you get all the way to that point, what it implies is you have to win on product, you have to win on your delivery experience, and then you have to re-win that consumer because perhaps they didn't make the final decision by that delivery experience and post-purchase experience. How are you engaging with them and interacting with them after the fact? How is the package getting delivered? Is it custom packaging? Is it those personalized inserts? Is it altogether an experience that delivers on the promise that you as a brand are implicitly making? And I think that's really the interesting piece with the agentic commerce, because when you zoom out and we talk about AI driving these high intent consumers, when we talk about, well, is it going to shift into this agentic world where AI is out there making purchases on my behalf, and we think about the flip side of 8 out of 10 consumers saying, if I have a poor delivery experience, I won't shop again from that brand. They almost seem a little bit at odds because you're thinking to yourself, well, they purchased from that brand based off a recommendation from this LLM. And maybe it even went through and made that transaction. So why wouldn't they shop for me again if they have a poor delivery experience? And what's implicit in all of that is trust, right? What we're doing is solving the trust factor at every step of the commerce journey. And when you think about the consumer responses on using AI for shopping or agentic commerce, there's some funny things. Like I know in your research, you had consumers saying, yes, they like using LLMs for shopping, but no, they don't want a brand to have an AI agent on their site or a chatbot because of the personalization aspect of it. And I think part of that really comes down to how, when we go through our busy days and we're all making decisions and making purchases, how do I offload some of my trust, right? And I think this is an area where Amazon historically, the reason why they're 1/3 of commerce in the U.S. or e-commerce in the U.S. is because they've managed to win that trust factor, right? If I go between two sites and I know that Amazon can get it to me in 2 days, well, I've got the implicit trust there that it will get there in 2 days because they've built that up over time. And so I think that's really the question for brands is if this landscape shifts and the historical, kind of staying power of my online storefront or my typical marketing channels shift, where can I continue to build that trust? And I think it comes back to I've got to have that entire delivery and post-purchase experience geared towards re-winning that consumer who just purchased from me.
Yeah, it seems like the friction points or the contradictions on the consumer side tend to relate to the intent of the experience versus the actual experience or the outcome. Another point of contradiction was that they said they wanted more personalized deals and recommendations, but they didn't like AI-powered search or something like that. And I was like, wait, but don't those two things kind of go hand in hand? But if we are to take a step back and think about the actual application of AI-powered search, maybe it was a buggy experience. Maybe the way the retailer configured that experience for the consumer didn't meet their expectations of what true personalization looks like. So I think that's another way to kind of break down, the mindset of how consumers interpret their needs to their actual interaction with a brand.
Yeah, and I think that the example there is also interesting from your point earlier on motives and incentives, right? If I think that the interaction and the recommendations I get from an LLM are objective, and I think that the AI search on a brand's website is maybe incentivizing specific sales, implicitly there I might have a difference in where I offload my trust, and I think I'll continue to bang this drum. I think it comes back to the same point of personalization and providing that world-class post-purchase and delivery experience. Personalization can, when it's done really well, is invisible, right? We don't even know it's happening, but we like it. When it's done poorly, we notice it immediately and we hate it.
And we tell everyone about it.
We tell everyone about it. And I think that's the unique challenge for brands. Like if you have this growing portion of your consumers that they're not telling you much. They're just arriving with expectations, and you have to go deliver this personalized experience to them. I think it's a really tricky situation, and I think that's where brands need to look heavier at. Have they really tapped all of the opportunities to deliver that experience at every step of their post-purchase? I mean, we do this thing called mystery shopping, where what we do is we're fulfillment and e-commerce nerds over at Stored, and so what we'll do is we'll shop a brand. We'll place a variety of orders, shop them to different locations. We'll measure all sorts of factors. What was the pre-purchase experience? What was the checkout experience? What were the ship options they presented? Did they have an estimated delivery date? What's their return policy? How quickly did a label get generated? How long did it take to ship? Did it arrive damaged? We'll run through the list. We have a variety of metrics we'll apply to it. The brand gets a score. We'll also do it for their competitors. And happy to do it if anyone's interested. We'll run it through. It's at our expense. But the interesting thing is as a result of it, we collect a lot of data, and it is astounding, just absolutely astounding, how many brands today are not taking advantage of all the capabilities, even just at their disposal today, let alone if they start actioning, if they apply AI throughout this, to provide these trust builders, these factors that allow a consumer to offload their trust to the brand, whether that be an estimated delivery date. I mean, we talked about it earlier, 40% of consumers will decide whether or not they shop based off whether they have an estimated delivery date that the package will arrive, whether it be the ship options, whether it be the return policy. I mean, I'm sure everyone has at least once decided whether they shopped at a brand based off whether they could find the return policy and whether it fit their needs. I mean, these are just like, you could trip over them. These are like low bar factors. And so I think it's really going to be an interesting time for brands, because these are going to become the all critical factors, because you're going to win or lose your overall consumer base in that post-purchase, in that delivery experience.
Yeah, well, because the tension for retailers is we want to provide that returns offering that consumers are expecting, but also we need to protect our margins. We need to, manage all of the expense that goes into the logistics tied to those returns. So there are definitely a lot of factors, I think, at play. And we can talk about this, I think, for a long time, because everything is so connected. But before we close out, does anyone have any questions or any areas of the discussion that we want to dig a little bit deeper into? Yeah, go ahead.
You talked a bit about how the marketplaces have, for the last 10 or 15 years, been the discovery platform. And as you lean into what Gen AI is doing to become that new discovery platform, how do you see that impacting some of those large and formidable marketplaces? Do you see them losing ground based on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I'll speak a little bit to what we've seen in some of our data, and I'm sure you have as well. I do think it can actually be a great opportunity for the many individual merchants out there relative to marketplaces, because what you're doing is basically that discovery platform, as we talked about, consumers are offloading trust, and so they're looking at an original point at what's the best product, right? And best is relative, and they're using their various research, but there's no forcing factor to push back to a marketplace. There's no forcing factor to push to any specific store, at least not today, when it's not, there's no advertising in there. And so it creates a level playing field at that discovery. I think what it does, though, is it also creates a really unique challenge, because to the points that we've talked about of that post-purchase and that delivery experience being more important than ever, well, if I'm, working with my LLM and my AI, and it's starting to learn about me, and it knows that, I like fast delivery, or, I like certain aspects, well, it's going to gear towards those outcomes. And even if it doesn't, if I'm presented a couple products, because, pretty rarely will it say, this is the only product, this is what you should do. It'll present you an array, which is why you still see a lot of consumers go from these LLMs to these sites to do a bit more research. But if I go to them and I see that one can get there, in 2 days for free, and I see that one can get there in 7 to 10 days, and I get a range for $20, it's pretty obvious decision for most consumers. And so I think it just puts more pressure on those points of, can a brand have the infrastructure and adopt the infrastructure that allows them to compete, even if they get a more level playing field to attract those consumers. But yeah, curious what your data has shown.
Yeah, no, I think you hit all of the key points. I think for our research, we've uncovered a lot of demographic nuance. So, of course, actually, interestingly, we found that millennials were more likely to offload research, comparison, even decision-making to their LLM bots, and mainly in categories that were highly technical or spec-driven, so a lot of electronics, sporting goods, whereas Gen Z leaned into LLMs for more like aesthetic research, trend discovery, and if they got into product comparison, it leaned more into categories like apparel, beauty, skincare, because they're looking to validate, all of those points that they uncovered maybe in social media and, word of mouth from like their friends or influencers. And then, of course, older demos are more likely to spearfish, I think, from the beginning. So in our research, at least, we found them more likely to go to general search than Amazon, of course, because they already have that particular thing in mind that they're looking for, and they're just looking for the cheapest one and the one that can get the fastest. So I do think, right now, it is very much like AI is becoming that heart of discovery and inspiration, not so much aspiration. I think that's very much still like YouTube and Instagram, Pinterest, et cetera. But we're tracking how that's trickling down and what that means for the major marketplaces, since it's all about breadth and not so much, depth of storytelling or, that aspirational piece that I think a lot of younger consumers in particular are looking for. Yeah, sure.
Also on the marketplaces piece, but a little bit separate on more live commerce and social, so maybe like a TikTok shop or like a whatnot. And these are fast growing, but still quite small today. But I imagine they'll all try to move to the FBA model eventually, right? As everyone's mentioned. I'm curious for you guys, have you guys seen that actually in the data, and is that consumer purchasing behavior into the new shirt fulfillment for those channels during the traditional D2C?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, I think taking TikTok as an example, they've actually had an interesting journey in the fulfillment side. They've both leaned in really heavily, then walked it back, and then trying to do more of a partnered approach. And I think you see this play out across a lot of different companies where. I think everyone in the room can appreciate that fulfillment and logistics and these operational spaces are incredibly difficult. And so, it's easy to want to package up an FBA type offering. It's much harder to do at scale, particularly when you're trying to convert a large marketplace that already has significant volume. But I think the bigger factor and what we've seen across brands is, as much as anything, the same way that Amazon offers fulfillment by merchant, most brands want to own that experience, because when you start offloading to these marketplaces, one of the challenges is you're put in a brown box and you're the same as every other SKU, and you're treated as a SKU. I mean, we had a founder of a brand that we know quite well, and I think they summarized it well, which is, Amazon, they were with FBA and MCF, if everyone's familiar, but they said, at Amazon, I was treated as a SKU, at Sword, I was treated as a brand, and that's a big part of why so many brands lean into Stored and some of the capabilities we have, is because they recognize the importance of being able to deliver that differentiated unboxing experience, that differentiated delivery experience that maybe you can win in the channel from a marketing aspect, but if you show up the same as everyone else, well, now you're a commodity and you have to win again in that same marketing channel versus starting to build that relationship with the consumer. So I think that's the first point. I think the second is, what I would expect across these various marketplaces is that they look to partner more and more over time, because I think what a lot of them have realized is there's a core competency aspect to this. And the space is so wide that they're best suited working with some of the leaders in the space and, directing brands in that way, or opening it up so that brands can manage it themselves.
Great. Well, I know we're way past our time, but thank you all so much for the questions. I know we're going into cocktails after the closing remarks, so definitely be sure to grab Jacob and ask any more questions. But thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you, Alicia.